That answer your question while we're waiting. Yes, this is the presentation of small-scale commercial poultry operation. Okay, I see the red light, so we have started recording. My name is Jackie Jacob. I'm at the University of Kentucky, and I coordinate the webinars for the small and backyard flocks. This night's web, Andy Larson, on scale commercial poultry operation. And since I'm having a bit of audio difficulties, I'll let Andy introduce it. Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Jackie. Howdy, folks. My name's Andy Larson. I'm with University of Illinois Extension on the Local Food Systems and Small Farms team. Came into this position in April and have been over at Iowa State as the small farm specialist over there for the 6 years prior to that. So I've been working in Extension for 8.5 years, something like that. Have also recently started exactly what this little webinar is going to be about. Started a small commercial chicken flock with my wife up here in northern Illinois. So this presentation is geared to people like me who had some backyard poultry experience and are thinking about what kind of effort and investment it would take to transform what is ostensibly a hobby into a more money-making oriented enterprise. And that's going to be through the sale of meat birds or eggs. I'll try to address both because I've started a layer flock. I might introduce a little bias by accident. Keep me on my toes. If I forget about a meat bird component, let me know. I want you to be aware that the lifestyle benefits provided by a hobby, such as entertainment or pleasure or recreation or just passing free time, very different from those benefits derived from having a farm business. So the nature of your relationship with your poultry pursuits is likely to change dramatically from a backyard situation to a commercial situation. So even if you really love your backyard chickens, more chickens does not directly translate into more love. So keep that in mind, and we'll talk about the different motivations that you need in order to think about this on a commercial scale. Ah, yes, the growing chicken. All right, so just to get this out of the way right away, this is our humble little poultry setup in north central Illinois. It's basically a 30-foot by 20-foot old wooden pole shed that was on the verge of falling down earlier this year. With some building materials and some elbow grease, it is now home to 300 red sex-linked brown egg layers. We'll talk about what that means, and also a miniature mule named Lucy for good measure. It's been painted red, and it's situated on about 3 acres of grass legume pasture that I've yet to improve, but it is pasture. And I'm telling you all of this now so that you know that my comments during this presentation will be colored to some certain extent by personal experience. So help me avoid slipping into a Midwestern bias, considering we have people from Maine, Texas, I don't know, Nebraska, if you consider yourself Midwest or not, probably. So, with that, let's talk, every good extension program. Whoops. Uh-oh. I screwed up the learning objectives component. So let me say the learning objectives. I really want you to know how to make the go or no-go decision on scaling up your chicken enterprise based on numbers, based on projected cost, projected returns, and not just a gut feeling. The other thing that I want to do is make sure that folks have a more complete awareness of the heartland of America. Very good, Dan. Have a pretty good idea of the breeds, the infrastructure, the equipment, the marketing considerations, the vehicles, the paperwork, all of that kind of stuff that go into actually beginning one of these enterprises. So that's where I'm trying to get you yet tonight. So the agenda, basically I'm going to divide this presentation into 2 parts. The first half is going to be, should I really do this? We're going to talk about goals, specifically income goals, profit margin, and scale considerations. The second half is, okay, I didn't get scared off by the first half. I'm actually going to do it now. What do I need? And that's where we'll start talking about breeds of birds, equipment, market development and customers, and then some of the paperworky side of things. Um, So this chicken is going to glare at you until she's convinced that you're making an informed decision. Like I said, know more than what your gut tells you. Know what the numbers tell you before deciding to get into a commercial poultry enterprise. So the first three questions you need to ask yourself are pretty simplistic. How much money do I need to make at this poultry business? Um, and it's a very realistic question to ask. It's not like whatever I can make. It's like, no, what's it going to take to make it worth your time to get into this? Do I need to make 100 grand raising poultry this next year? Well, you're going to work hard at it and you're going to have a lot of birds, and that may not be a realistic goal. Do I need to make sort of a supplemental income that's the equivalent of a part-time job? So maybe a 15 to 20 grand. How much profit is there in each product that I sell? We're going to talk about trying to get towards that in some detail in the next couple slides. And as a result of those two things, how many birds do I need to reach my income goal? Not complicated questions, but they are going to determine pretty much where you begin. So let's just say, for example, that you want to make 50 grand raising poultry commercially. And we're talking about broilers here, so let's say you can make $5 per bird in profit margin, which I would say is probably a little bit optimistic in a lot of markets, but we'll just go with it for the time being. Realize that that equals to 10,000 birds that you need to raise over the course of a year to make that 50 grand. If 10,000 birds sounds like a lot to you, that's understandable. It's a big number, but honestly, it's on the small side for commercial poultry operations. When you think about those big confinement buildings, that's probably one building. So if you're thinking sort of in the thousands of birds ballpark, you're probably in the realm of part-time or full-time job for yourself. If you're thinking more sort of in the hundreds where I'm at, you're probably talking about sort of a side gig or a supplemental income. So now I want to delve a little bit deeper into these questions so we can refine this ballpark into at least, the infield. Two disclaimers for you. I'm going to be painting with a pretty broad brush from a numerical standpoint. So the figures herein are very general, and they're not necessarily representative of your conditions where you are around the country. They're loosely garnered from my own personal experiences and my wife's personal experiences with raising and marketing chickens here in the Midwest. So really what I'm trying to do with these numbers is illustrate broader concepts. The second thing that I always like to say about projections is the reason they're projections is because they're wrong. They're always going to be wrong. That's why they're projections. Nonetheless, I really encourage anybody who's doing this to strive to be as accurate and as complete as possible when you're getting past the back of the envelope type of stage. One other thing to mention, if you have questions, please do feel free to type those into the chat box. I will do my best to pay attention and catch those as we go along. And if I don't, either Jackie or Suzanne will let me know as we're going or towards the end whenever there's a break in the talking. Okay, let's think about our income goal. I really think that there needs to be some realistic expectations laid out for you. What is your actual level of commitment to this thing? Is this going to be your primary income? Is $50,000 of annual profit realistic for a small scale flock? Well, it depends on what you consider small scale. For what most of us consider small scale, that's probably not realistic. And we should be thinking in something a little bit lower than that. Diversification. Is commercial poultry going to be the only money-making enterprise on your farm? Are you raising vegetables? Are you raising sheep or goats or row crops? Do you have to make your full-time primary income off of this? Consider your pay rate carefully. Yeah, I know that maybe you make 30 bucks an hour in your day job, but when you think about it, what would you pay perhaps a high school kid to shovel chicken poop? Okay? So when you're deciding how much you need to make and how much your time is worth, think about it more as to what you'd hire someone to do something for as opposed to what you're getting paid now in your day job. And finally, a big consideration, opportunity cost. What would I otherwise be doing with my time? So, are you quitting like a nice salaried day job to be a chicken farmer? Or is this something that's, filling up time that's not otherwise earning you anything? Would you be on the couch watching TV? If you're saying to yourself after you go through this presentation with me how much more you could be making in a regular job, well, that's still an option. So consider that. Let's try to get to a little bit of profit margin specificity here. So let's talk about eggs and let's talk about broilers both. How much money is really in a dozen eggs that you're trying to sell? Well, you're going to have variable costs. You're going to have fixed costs. The way I operate, I figured that my feed that goes into my layers, it's about 22 cents a pound, which turns out through a little bit of math that my birds eat about 6.5 cents of feed per day. So that translates into something like 78 cents a feed, and I round it up to $1. Labor-wise, it takes my wife and I about 2 man-hours of labor to do chicken chores and do our egg handling and produce a 20 market-ready dozen carton eggs. So that breaks out into about $1 a dozen. Packaging is highly variable depending on the volume that you purchase in. It can range anywhere per dozen carton. It can range anywhere from 20 cents to 50 cents. I would encourage you to try to get closer to that 20 cents simply from a profit margin consideration. And now, marketing cost. Marketing cost also widely variable. This is the figure that it takes for you to take the market ready dozen eggs in your cooler at home and drive them to the farmer's market, stand at your stand, and get them into the hands of a paying customer. Okay, and that's going to be widely variable as well. And I'll talk about where that 50 cents came from in just a moment here. Fixed costs per dozen eggs are going to be, it's pennies. It's probably going to be a rounding error. But as you can see, we're already talking about somewhere in the neighborhood for my operation of $3 in costs that go into each of these dozen eggs. So, what is my customer willing to pay? If they're only willing to pay $3 a dozen, that's a big red light for me. I'm going to stop there and say this is probably not the enterprise for me, or I'm going to seek out a different customer. If they're willing to pay $5 a dozen, which, being as close to Chicago as I am, there are people who are willing to pay $5 a dozen for a dozen eggs. And depending on where some of the rest of you are, you hear crazy stories about people in San Francisco paying $12.50 for a dozen eggs at a farmer's market. And so maybe that's going to afford you a lot more profit margin, but it probably depends on your overhead for land, for packaging, for how far you had to travel to get there, etc., etc. I mentioned marketing costs. So, for whatever reason, many of us, and maybe the reason is sort of rationalization for doing something that doesn't make all the sense in the universe. Many of us tend not to think about the time or the resources that it takes to get that market-ready dozen eggs or that market-ready chicken carcass from our farms or our businesses or whatever into the hands of a paying customer. Our time has value, and when you think about all the things that go into delivery, such as car repairs, fuel, tires, those have price tags. There's some worth lost with every mile we drive on our vehicle. Not to mention any kind of, if you buy dry ice to do your delivery to make sure you're under a specific county temperature threshold that you have to stay beneath when you're marketing or whatever. Those are all costs. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we have to factor those into the price commanded by the product in the marketplace. So that's the kind of willingness to pay we need to find. Over here in the files pod on the left, you'll see something called FD_FS_ distribution cost template. It's a farm to school distribution cost template, but I use it as sort of a loose delivery calculator for what it costs me to get a product somewhere. In my situation, that dozen eggs, the sale price at the farmer's market is $4.50. We're selling anywhere from 50 to 70 dozen, maybe 80 in the average week. Somewhere 64 is the average I put in there. Let's see if I got an arrow. I do. 64 down here. If we say that we're only paying my wife $10 an hour to go to the market and stand there for 4 hours, and the market is 38 miles away, making a 76-mile round trip. Fuel is $3. I get $24 a gallon on my minivan. Tires cost this much. Depreciation costs this much, etc. Plug that all into the calculator, and oh, holy crap! I've got a distribution cost of $1 plus in each of those dozens that I sell. So if I already had $2 of, or excuse me, $1 of feed and $1 of labor, and I add another $1, $1.05 onto that cost of production and marketing for that dozen eggs, $4.50 is only leaving me about $1.45 in margin for each dozen. So that really makes a huge difference. $1.45 per dozen is a lot less than $2.50 that you might otherwise think that you're making at the farmer's market per those dozen eggs. Like I said, feel free to download that distribution cost template on the left, originally developed in Oklahoma for their farm to school program. Broiler profit margins, of course, are going to be a little bit different and very highly variable depending on your state, depending on your processing availability. The variable cost per bird, yeah, a chick isn't necessarily really going to cost $2, but I threw another couple of loose change things in there. A lot of these figures came from, again, over on the file pod on the left, you see something called ATRA, Meat Chicken Breeds Pastured Production. ATRA is the National Sustainable Agriculture Information Service at atra.org. Great sustainable ag and alternative ag publications. So I borrowed a lot of these figures from Ann Fanatico's publication through them. So the chick plus some other various change is going to cost you about $2. Feed, $5 for that 15 to 18 pounds of feed over the course of the anywhere from 6 to 12 to 18 weeks that you're growing out that broiler. Labor, about $4. Feed and labor are always going to be the largest part of your cost per bird, variable cost per bird. And processing is going to vary highly. I hear processing figures ranging from $2.25 to $4.25 in my neck of the woods. I'd be really curious what the average cost to harvest a broiler in your respective area of the country look like. If you want to take and type a couple of those into the chat pod over on the left, I'd be really curious to see sort of the range that processing is coming in at around the U.S. Fixed costs, somewhere around $2. And what is that customer going to pay? Again, is it $3 a pound for that bird, and you've got a 4.5 pound bird, and we're talking about $13.50? It's not going to make you much. Whereas if the $5 a pound figure, that's going to be a $4 to $5 margin. $1.50 for Aaron. Oh my gosh, Aaron, that's fantastic. You need to email me and tell me where you're processing because I will drive for it. So this is just kind of, again, very, very loose. And part of the situation that I'm facing here in Illinois is that we only have one commercial poultry processor that can do certified commerce, allowable, legal for trade type of processing, and they are 4 hours away from where I'm living. So that would definitely add to the processing figure for an operation in my neck of the woods. Ah, I see. Under 1,000 birds in Wisconsin. Yeah, there are, of course, and we can talk about this in a little more detail if you guys want to. There are, of course, state by state exemptions as to how many meat birds you can process on your farm and sell them from your farm. In the state of Illinois, it's actually 5,000. So if you want to go to the effort and the investment of your own processing equipment and infrastructure, that's definitely has the potential to change your cost structure per bird. So a little more math tells you, okay, I want to make 20 grand a year. I want to make that part-time income, and I want to do it selling eggs. So if I can indeed command at least $1 a dozen in margin, that means I got to sell 20,000 dozens per year. That might sound like a lot, but a little bit of math tells me that that's about 657 eggs per day. Not outside of the realm of possibilities, because that at about a 90% laying rate translates into about 700, 730 hens. Not bad, not huge. However, you're going to have to figure out how to market 383 dozens per week at that $5 a dozen price point. That's a lot of farmers markets in all likelihood, unless you're going to a large metro like a Chicago, a Minneapolis, I don't know, is there any place in Maine that could absorb 383 dozens in a farmers market session? I don't know. So another consideration on top of that is that if you're producing at some scale, there's a good chance that not every one of your products is going to go into the end consumer market. You might be selling to restaurants, to institutions, to retail stores, those type of places. So consider that there may be a wholesale discount on each of those things. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll talk a little bit more about why that is in a few minutes here. Birds needed to reach your goal on the broiler side. So maybe $5 might have been a little bit rich for profit margin, but $4 is probably achievable depending on your feed source, depending on your genetics, and depending on your processing. A lot of depending on. So you've got to figure what's the length of your growing season. How many rounds of birds can I grow? Do I do 5 rounds of 1,000? 2 rounds of 2,500? Either way, what's my death loss? Am I spreading out all of the manure that you produce out of those broilers? Is it being spread out over enough land not to cause any kind of excess fertility? Do you have processing capacity within driving distance or within your state? Dan, are you asking me when I brooded my layers? I brooded them at a horrible time starting January 31st of this past year in my garage. I learned a lot of negative lessons that way. So that's when they started. They got out into the coop at about 12 to 14 weeks of age. So again, what can your market
cost? Did you
say that one more time,
cost
Jackie?
Did you include the cost of brooding your layers in your factoring for egg production costs?
Let me go back to it. No, I did not factor in the costs of brooding. This was just I'm on the wrong slide. I'm sorry. It was just the variable cost per dozen on an ongoing basis. So yes, there is going to be a brooding cost for each one of those birds that is going to have to be sort of, I guess you'd call it depreciated out over the life of that layer. Does that make sense? So once again, with the broilers, you have a pretty substantial volume to move in the course of a month, and you have that whole wholesale discount to consider at some point. So those are some numbers. Hopefully people aren't too freaked out or too bored. We're going to start talking about some actual startup considerations, some pictures, some more than just math in the second half of the presentation. But I'd love to hear what kind of questions that people have in the
Yes.
meantime. Donna's asking, ready-to-lay birds are $5 each. I would say that that's a fantastic deal, Donna, and I'd have Jackie either correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that in most situations people are going to be able to get birds ready to lay from chick to through pullet to laying age for $5. The complication that I run up against is where are they producing and selling started pullets? For the most part, I'm unable to find anything at $5, and I'm not able to find anything closer to Illinois than Ohio or Pennsylvania. And I haven't looked extensively, I'll admit, because I planned to start my birds from chicks anyway. But yeah, the ready-to-lay birds at $5, I would say, is a great place to start. Eliminating that initial brooding cost and that brooding risk, where you're going to have a little bit of death loss in the brooding. That's great. I mean, that's one less thing that you really got to worry about. As long as those folks who are raising the pullets to lay are doing so in a way that agrees with your production system and the characteristics that you need for your marketplace, I like the sound of that. Dan mentioned that he brooded his chicks in August of last year, and they ended up molting before 52 weeks. That's interesting, Dan. I'm sorry to hear that. I would be interested to know what breed of layer that you were using and under what conditions they were in. There's a couple of different things that can initiate a molt early, and I can't remember exactly what they are off the top of my head. Jackie's going to have to help me on that. But there's also breeds of commercial layers who are designed to go for a longer period of time. Go for a longer period of time before the molt and a longer initial laying cycle.
It depends a lot on lighting and nutrition and breed.
Yes.
There was also
Okay.
a question
Yeah.
that did you say it only takes you and your wife 2 hours each day to clean up after your layers?
Yeah, we spend about 2 hours per day, 2 total man hours per day doing chicken chores and doing egg handling. And that's primarily because we have mechanized our egg washing. The actual chores that we have to do tend to be pretty minimal. We did as much automation in our hen house as we possibly could, and I could talk about some of that later too. But yeah, that's kind of my loose estimate of how much time goes into each 20 dozen eggs. Does that sound way out in left field to you, Jackie?
No, that sounds good.
Okay. I'm just curious. I don't know what the industry standard is. I suppose it depends an awful lot on the degree of mechanization.
Very much, and the different systems using if you're free ranging versus in a pasture pen, or if you're in a facility like yours. I mean, it all depends.
Okay. Couple other comments. Dan was raising heritage Rhode Island Reds raised on pasture. Yeah, Rhode Island Reds are pretty decent layers for heritage breeds. They really are. And if you are planning on brooding a lot of your, or excuse me, incubating a lot of your own incubating and brooding a lot of your own replacements, a non-hybridized heritage breed like that might be a great thing, but you definitely got to look at what it costs you for a shorter laying cycle and for productivity. Maybe I ought to have started Pullet Enterprise. Yeah, maybe so. My replacements will be brooded in March next year. can have a difference in production longevity. Yeah, that probably has a lot to do with the light per day that they're exposed to, Dan. I'll talk a little bit more about that in lighting in just a minute here. Please tell us more about time-saving techniques. Okay, let's get into some of that. So you've decided that you're sure about this thing, and let's go ahead and get going and figure out how to start an actual commercial enterprise. If you're not scared off by the numbers and you want to start thinking about facilities, equipment, insurance, inspections, markets, and capital to pay for it all, let's get rolling. Okay, so a lot of the startup considerations are going to boil down into about a half a dozen questions that I'll lay out right here and then answer sort of progressively over the course of the next 20 minutes or so. What kind of chicken should I get? You know, we had some breed discussions already with the chat pod. How am I going to keep them? What's their housing going to look like? Is it going to be seasonal or year-round? Is it going to be stationary or mobile? What equipment do I need? And we're talking about handling for both live birds, processed birds, eggs, packaged eggs. How am I going to keep them cold? How am I going to get them to market? How do I find my customers, which is my wife and I have deemed to be one of the most time-intensive components of starting up a small commercial enterprise. If I wanted to add in my marketing cold call time for between me and my wife, it probably pushes up our marketing costs quite a bit. Permissions, inspections, certification, licenses, insurance, all the paperworky type of stuff. That goes in there. How will I pay for all this? So those are the 6 questions I want to sort of answer. So I'm going to set them up and knock them down as best I can. So if you're going to get into meat birds here, you pretty much have 2 reasonable options. You got your Cornish cross, sort of the industry gold standard for meat production. They've got an incredible feed conversion ratio. It's usually 3 pounds of feed to 1 pound of gain or better, and a short time to market. In sort of the industry situation, they're going to be at market weight in 6 weeks. In a pasture situation, it might be a little longer than that, depending on your systems that you have in place. However, before I get into that, they're not necessarily the most hardy bird. In a pasture situation, they've got leg problems, they've got heart problems because they just grow like crazy. And if you really are trying to get any amount of your feed bill offset by the pasture that they're on, this breed isn't going to be the strongest forager that you can buy. The other is the Red Ranger or the Freedom Ranger, and that's kind of pretty much the other possibility on the market right now, unless somebody has heard of something different. I'd be curious. They're smaller, but they're still meaty. You can see sort of the frame shape in that picture there. But they are going to do a lot more active foraging. So they'll take about twice as long to get to market weight. Instead of 6 to 8 weeks, we're talking about 12 to 16 weeks here. That doesn't necessarily mean that they require twice the feed. That they don't. But it is going to increase the amount of time you spend laboring with them. So if you're selling on the characteristics of forage fed or free range or slow growing or different tasting or whatever, anything that's different from the industry standard, these are pretty much your other option. If you're thinking about egg layers here, again, 2 kind of general categories that I want to talk about. The hybrid sex-linked brown egg layers, commonly referred to as the stars, red stars or black stars. There's a lot of other names, especially for the red stars, the red sex-linked brown egg layer, because that's just too long to say. Cinnamon Queen, Golden Comet, Cherry Egger, no, or is that an... Anyway, they go by a bunch of different names because of the specific cross that they're using to create that hybrid. They're pretty small framed. They're docile. They're pretty quiet. They're pretty adaptable to weather conditions. and they're just nuts productive. They're really productive. I'm talking in the realm of 270 to 280 or more eggs in the first laying cycle. Um, and that first laying cycle is usually going from 20 weeks to 80 weeks in one of these birds, maybe even a little beyond. As Dan was talking about before, it is possible to go ahead and get a couple of the um, heritage heavy breed layers. Australorp on the left, black Australorp, and the Rhode Island Red on the right. They're not going to come close to the stars in efficiency. Um, they don't. They're probably not going to have the same number of eggs in that first laying cycle, but you are going to be able to raise your own replacements. So that's something you can consider. But again, use the numbers to help you make that decision. Is it worth it for you to save the, 200 or 800 or $1,200 on chicks? Suggestions for white or green egg layers? Yeah, the white egg layers, the industry standard's a white leghorn. Wildly productive little birds. Not great in a range situation because they're so flighty. Yeah, so if you're going to have a sort of a traditional industry standard livestock barn, that's probably going to work out fine. There are a couple of the companies, the genetics companies like ISA and Highline and those that do have a white egg layer. Well, it's more of a lightly tinted brown egg layer that could work for. Are light brown leghorns better for foraging? I don't know that. I don't know much about the leghorn breed in and of itself. Jackie, would you say that a light brown leghorn is going to be better for foraging than a white?
I've heard that, especially if it's not a commercially selected one. The
Okay.
commercially selected ones are far too flighty.
Yeah. Okay. The green
But
egg
there,
layers, those are going to be sort of your specialty birds. That's going to be your Oricanas, or if they're crossed, potentially an Americana. Um, Small birds, also a little bit flightier, not going to be as productive, but boy, those green eggs make people drool at the farmer's market. So you're going to kind of have to balance the productivity of your birds with the attractiveness of the final product. I mean, if you're in a situation where you can mix brown and white and green eggs in a dozen at the farmer's market, people are going to go bonkers for those things. At least that's the experience that I've had. People love those green eggs. But you're not necessarily going to want a whole flock of those things from an efficiency and productivity standpoint.
the French Morans are very popular too for the dark chocolate.
Yep. Yep. And how are they on the productivity side, Jackie?
Not nearly as good as the others.
Yeah. Yep. So there's always going to be trade-offs here. Different characteristics, efficiency and productivity versus something that might be marketable. The multicolored or all brown seem to be really popular here, sure. Yeah, and the Marins that Jackie was just talking about with those dark chocolate brown eggs, yeah, they are going like gangbusters. You can barely even get the layers ordered online. One of the things that I really dug about ordering a commercial brown egg layer is that it came with an instruction book. I thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread. I mean, this little book for my birds contained, this is exactly the amount of space they need to have for their stocking density. This is exactly the temperature that they need to be at. This is the grams or tenths of hundreds of pounds of feed that they're going to eat over the course of this week and this week and this week and this week. And this is when they're going to lay and at what level of peak productivity and how old they need to be to do so. I mean, for somebody who hadn't raised layers commercially before, having that kind of information, oh, well, let me make another disclaimer. I'm a bit of a nerd for spreadsheets. That's why I have two spreadsheets over in the downloadable files on the left. The bottom one, Poult Budge, is a generalized poultry budget from the University of Wisconsin Extension. But I loved having this kind of information to do some real calculations as to what we were likely to produce and therefore what we were likely to make in any given week. That was a big part of the decision for me to get into layer production. And if you're trying to get into something commercial, as in something larger than what you can pay for out of your own checking account, and you're going to want an ag loan, that kind of information is going to be really valuable to the person that you're trying to sell this prospect to. What was the minimum order to go commercial? I didn't define commercial here, Pam. What I mean when I say commercial is that you're basically doing it as a business enterprise, a for-profit enterprise, as opposed to the small backyard or hobby scale. So what I mean when I say commercial, I mean you're trying to make money at it. So commercial can be a lot of different scales. I'd consider my flock commercial at 300 birds because it's paying its bills and going a little bit above that. But a commercial flock could also be, hundreds of thousands to millions of birds. We have, a million plus bird flock right up here in northern Illinois.
The handy booklet is available online. You don't have to buy any birds to get it.
That's exactly right. The reason I was excited about this one specifically is because it was for my birds. If you want to go to the ISA website, if you want to go to the Highline website, I mean, you can buy some really authoritative production manuals for layers. Is the same true for broilers, Jackie?
Yes, very much so. For the Cornish, not the Red Rangers.
Yes. Okay. That's kind of what I figured. When you're doing something that's a bird that's commercially used in the industry today, you're much more likely to be able to find some seriously detailed production information regarding that bird. So I elected to go with stationary housing. There's a number of things that you have to consider. The first being space. I was limited by an upright building at 30 by 20. I had 600 square feet. So I elected to get 300 birds. Simple division. Lighting, if you want to keep a bird in production, especially as the day length starts to grow shorter, you're going to need to keep those birds at 14 to 16 hours per day. Some of the commercial production manuals will even give you another burst of light in the middle of the night in order to encourage additional feed consumption. So lighting programs are important. There are full-blown software programs to help you figure those out if you want. I went with just basically a simple electromechanical timer to turn my lights on and lights off at given points in the day, which I love, except for daylight savings time, which we just passed. Feeders, depending on the number of birds you're going to have to have feeders that will at least accommodate 4 to 6 ounces per bird per day for layers. More than that for broilers. So it's really easy to come by feeders that'll hold 35 to 50 pounds. They're pretty cheap. When you start getting larger than that, they start getting pretty expensive. You can automate feeding. If you want to go to that initial investment, you can automate. You can automate a lot of things. Water. Water and feed, the amount taken in is going to depend on temperature. So at the average 60-degree day, a bird is probably going to take in somewhere in the realm of about 7 ounces of water. When it's 85 or 90 degrees, we're talking about 11 or 12 ounces per day. So you want to make sure that you can accommodate that amount of water daily. I really like these. This is a nipple water. They're super cheap to build. You just order these little plastic nipples down here from, an ag supplier at about $1.50 or $2 a piece. Stick them in some 5-gallon buckets that you got on eBay, and you got a nice, clean, low drip type of water that's easy to fill, easy to clean, but it's not automated. I mean, you are going to have to fill that thing with the hose on a very regular basis. So it's something to keep in mind.
I'd also like to point out that picture that you have there, the positioning of the nipples is too low.
Yep. That bird is having to squat down a little bit in order to get at that nipple. You really want them to be able to see that red color and be attracted to it. And so they can be in kind of optimal drinking position. So the thinking is that it ought to be at about the bottom should be at eye level or a little higher. Is that right, Jackie?
No, with the adult birds, it should be higher so that
Higher than eye level.
they have to stretch to reach it. For chicks, it should be at eye level.
Okay. Very good.
And typically with the nipple drinkers, you have less water spillage, so that's why most people go to nipple drinkers
Yeah.
in answer to Dan's questions.
Yeah. I mean, we've tested out a bazillion different, large gallon poultry founts and have not been satisfied with any of them. Either they can't maintain the vacuum that keeps the water in, or the birds splash around in them, or tip them over, or whatever, or they just get really dirty. The nipple waters tend to be really clean because they have that lid on top. So I'm a fan of the nipple water, as if you're not going to have an automated watering system. On the litter side, you don't really have to say much more than pine shavings. Pine shavings, they're cheap, they're widely available, and they're a really effective bedding for poultry. Yes, there are tons of alternatives to pine shavings. There are shredded up pallets. There is pine straw that doesn't work as well. Corn cobs, peanut hulls, rice hulls. I believe one of Jackie's pubs even says that they're researching sand as a bedding material, which I'm intrigued by and would like to know some more about. But basically, if you can find something that's cheap and abundant in your neck of the woods and you want to use it as litter, that's fine. Just make sure it doesn't have some of the problems that some of the alternatives do. A really small particle size is going to encourage those birds to eat it, especially if you're raising dumb birds like turkeys. You don't want to have a material that's likely to cake and crust, like a straw or pine straw. You don't want to have materials that have previously held potentially toxic compounds. So if you have ground pellets, you never know what was on being held on that pellet before it was ground up. Pam's trying sand for the chicks and young birds. Interesting. And Auburn had success with that. Yeah, I'd be interested to see a situation like that.
The other thing to remember is that if you're going organic, which can get you a little bit more money, you have to be careful about what bedding material you use.
Well, then it sounds like sand would be a really good alternative there.
Yeah.
Because I don't think there's such a thing as conventional or organic sand, is there?
Not that I know of.
Not that I know of either. All right, perch space, you need about 6 inches per bird. It needs to be a 2-inch diameter material, metal tube, furring strip, wood, whatever. Whatever birds can grip, make sure that it's high enough that they're not roosting on something else within the house, and make sure that they can get high. Some of the lower pecking order birds can get high enough to escape getting picked on. Nest boxes. I recommend usually 1 box per 5 birds. I've heard recommendations as low as 3 or 4, and I've heard recommendations as high as 6 or 8. So you can probably get away with more birds per nest box. But what you're trying to do is minimize the amount of birds that are using the same nest box and treading on the existing eggs in that situation. What do you tend to recommend, Jackie?
1 to 5 is usually pretty good, but it depends on the quality of the nest boxes, because you could have 20 nest boxes and they only use a particular 2 or 3.
Because they're darker or have better bedding or something like that.
Something about it that they like.
Okay. I've found that the birds like to use the nest boxes on the south wall of my coop much more than on the north wall, and I have not figured out for the life of me why. All right, ventilation. I want to talk in just a little bit more detail because this was perplexing to me when I was designing my coop. You got to decide between natural or mechanical ventilation. Do I want to just open windows and doors to get an approximately appropriate amount of air through that hen house? Or do I want to be a little bit more exacting about it and have fans, air inlets, vents, etc.? 2 different types of mechanical systems. Positive pressure is basically where you're pushing air through the coop, and negative pressure where you're pulling air through the coop. And I'll exhibit that in just a second here. How much air do you need? It's going to depend on the temperature and the amount of birds that you have crammed in there. Okay, if you got a cooler air temperature at somewhere in the realm of 40 degrees Fahrenheit, you're only going to need about 4/10 of a cubic foot of CFM, cubic foot per minute, of air moving through that thing. If you're going to be more at like 100 degrees at some point in the summer, you're going to want to make sure you have the mechanical ventilation capacity to move 1 CFM per pound of bird. And that's a pretty substantial amount of air. So you got to plan for the extremes. This is a pretty typical ventilation setup with a thermostat and a couple and one exhaust fan, some inlets on the various sides of the coop, and that is a negative pressure system that's pulling air from the inlet through and around the coop and out the exhaust fan. Important to get that air out because it removes water vapor, dust, potential pathogens, things like that, and keeps fresh air coming into that coop. It even needs to happen in the winter, which was what the complexity I ran up against. Um, I've got a pastured layer system. I need to have ventilation in the winter, but I've got that little pop door that's open at the bottom of one end of my coop so that they can get out to the pasture. If I had a negative pressure situation, ventilation situation, it would be pulling that cold air and creating a nice cold draft right along the floor where all the birds are inside the poultry house. That sounded like a bad proposition to me. So I actually ended up, for better or for worse, with two different ventilation systems, one positive pressure and one negative pressure. So the negative pressure is like this one here, the middle left, where there's a couple of fans on the wall, turn on one with a thermostat, turn on the second one when it gets hotter in there, sucks a certain amount of air through that thing, keeps the air moving. We have the doors open, we have a shutter inlet. That's allowing the fresh air to move through the coop. In the winter, when I'm trying to move a bare minimum of that cold outside air through the coop, I have a positive pressure tube that I'll show you in just a moment here with a tube fan. It's a technology that was mostly developed for calf barns in the cattle industry. So this is my improvised little situation. Up here on the top, along here on the upper left, is that tube with holes. It's just simple 6-inch PVC with holes drilled in it at a particular size at a particular interval. I had an ag engineer tell me what the size of the interval was. That worked out real nice. Right here is a plastic gravity-weighted air inlet. So when the fans that are over here on the right, out of the shot, turn on, and any of the other ingresses into the coop are closed up, that can still get air through there. Simple used 10-hole nest boxes, an LB White thermostatically controlled propane heater up here in the corner, fluorescent lighting, 6 bulbs along the top, and some not adequate perches. I'm not happy with my perches right now. I've just got a couple gates leaned up against each other. I think they're too short, too close together, and not enough refuge for the birds that need to escape. So I'm looking at adopting a different perch system for my coop. This is looking south towards the other end of the building. It's not a big building, as you can see. The same kid has only had to walk a few steps to get there. Down here is a poultry butler, an automatic coop controller that allows the pop door to be opened either on a timer or on a light sensor, a photo sensor for when the sun goes up and comes down. There is a hose here from the left that's running from a hydrant outside into the waters, which normally hang right in this area here. I have bucket nipple waterers that I have just got a hose with a heating element to keep it flowing over the course of the winter. And then right up here, this little, this is the beginning of the tube with the air inlet and the tube fan right here, and the thermostat. So when the thermostat tells the tube fan to turn off, the wall fan turns on. And lastly, this little green box is the energizer for the electric fence. How do I clean out the hen house? Boy, I'm so glad you asked that one, Richard. By hand with silage forks and high school kids. The building was too short to be able to get our Bobcat loader in from the farm down the road. So we elected to remove the garage door and just have man doors on the side of the coop. And so silage forks, shoveling up the nice soiled litter into the Bobcat, and got a whole side slinger load, manure spreader load of chicken poo. And that is going to be from, let's see, March through October in that picture. Um,
So how
yeah,
often do
it
you
took
clean out?
about so far once. My plan was to do it about twice a year. Once before the winter hits, so we can have plenty of space for the litter to accumulate over the course of the winter when it tends to accumulate. And then once in spring, when we have that accumulation from the winter when they're inside a lot, give them some fresh stuff to have in the um, during the growing season.
Some people like to just do it to leave the litter over the winter so that it's composting at the bottom and providing heat.
Yes, I have heard that, and I've also been curious to go through there with a rototiller to actually encourage that composting process a little bit further. Um, haven't done it yet though. Like I said, this is my first season.
Mhm.
This is going to be more of your industry standard type of layer house. This is going to be your stationary hen house. This is a cage-free hen house in Pennsylvania. Um, yeah, this is if you're thinking about going on the multi-thousand, the 3 to 10,000 type of scale. This is probably the situation you're going to be looking at. Higher initial investment, um, an entirely different business proposition and business structure. Jackie, I meant to ask you: are we going until 7 or until 7:30?
On the hours, really. So you're actually running out of time.
I am running out of time, so I'm going to talk about one more thing here. Two more things. I'm going to talk about range housing and equipment real quick. Um, range housing is what you've kind of seen the mobile coops and things like that. You got a lot of the same considerations for space, feed, and water, but you got a couple other sort of things that you have to decide between. What is the weight versus what is the mobility, the movability? You want it to be heavy enough, the chicken tractor to be heavy enough that it's not going to blow away, but you want to be able to move it with a dolly, preferably. You got to have some kind of protection from the wind and the rain. You don't want to end up with sick or dead young birds or vulnerable birds. And how are you going to keep predators out, especially the digging predators that like to go under the edges? So you can see here Joel Salatin from Swope, Virginia, Polyface Farm, sort of the initial evangelizer of the chicken tractor. He has a whole flotilla of these doodads on his farm with birds in them, with rabbits in them. He does a lot of tractoring. Um, I've seen more of these lately, the sort of poultry arc design.
Hoop pen.
Uh, say again?
It's called a hoop pen.
Yep, hoop pens. Heard of different names for them. Pretty simplistic. It's just a hog panel curved over the top of a wooden frame and then covered with a tarp, or I know one producer that covers them with old billboard sheets. Um, pretty cool, pretty slick little system, pretty low weight. Um, but you want to be careful. The hoop pen thing is a great thing, but some people get a little bit over-engineered, and then the whole mobility aspect gets sort of thrown out the window. I'd say it'd probably take a truck or tractor to move this pen any place. So be considerate of what benefits are most important to you. Also, one other thing, chicken manure is pretty hot. I mean, there's a lot of fertility in chicken manure. Make sure if you're moving pens around a pasture that you have enough land base to adequately spread the fertility out. You don't want to have an over-fertilization situation in any part of your pasture. For product handling with broilers, it's really you got a harvesting question here. Do you want to do it yourself or do you want to take it to the processing plant? If you want to do it yourself, there's a number of different pieces of equipment you're going to have to procure. coops, kill cones, scalders, pluckers, knives, preferably on stainless steel tables, backpackers, legal for trade scales, that kind of stuff. It sounds like a lot, but if you're going to be spreading that investment out over a lot of units, you can certainly make it pay. Um,
It's
really going to depend to say again.
it's important to note that how you can sell your broilers will vary from state to state. The legal
Absolutely.
requirements for selling are something that you need to make sure that you verify for your state because it varies from state to state.
And if you're near a state line, you're going to have to know two different sets of regulations, so be very cognizant of those things. On the egg side, again, regulations are going to vary from state to state. So how much you have to wash, candle, grade, pack, cool, store, and transport your eggs is going to be vastly different whether you live in Illinois or in Wisconsin. I'm within 10 miles of the Wisconsin state line, and I have to understand two different sets of regulations for that. Do I have to, and I'll show you my setup in just a second here, do I have to wash my eggs? The $10,000 question. The short answer is if your regulations say you have to, yes, you have to wash your eggs. But the question you're probably getting at is, should you have to wash your eggs? Because in Europe, it's illegal to wash your eggs before they go to market. In the United States, it's illegal not to wash your eggs before they go to market. Do what your regulations tell you to do. The science is kind of open to interpretation. I would say that the preponderance is leaning towards washing, but there's still a lot of places in the world where it's not. However, here in the United States, you're going to have to wash them. My situation is very rudimentary. I've got an old Sanitouch. At the time, it was called an Aqua Magic belt washer. Some plastic trays, a Lion Corp hand egg candler with two candling wands, impermanently affixed there with a clamp, and a legal for trade scale, some custom stickers on cartons. So that's how I tend to handle and package the eggs, and this is how we get them to market. Is it efficient? Is it cheap? Yeah, it was cheap to begin with. And I like the idea of making my mistakes cheaply to begin with. If you're thinking about getting big and commercial and for real, you're going to want to think about mechanization. This is Sanitouch still does make nationalpoultryequipment.com some of the industry standard small scale egg handling type of systems. On your left here, you have an egg candler, automatic mechanized egg candler, an egg washer, rinser dryer here in the middle, and a grater sorter here on the right. And that's where we're talking about 18 to 2,500 eggs per hour. So that's going to be a little bit bigger than what most people consider small scale. I'm going to skip over a couple things. Who are my customers? All I'm going to encourage you to do is think about what kind of value you're providing, what people are willing or able to pay, and what the demographic, geographic, and psychographic characteristics of those different people look like. If you can create sort of a loose customer profile of who you need to do business with in order to successfully further your operation, you're going to be able to have a good set of selection criteria to judge potential customers against. Wholesale versus retail. Don't eliminate wholesale out of hand just because the sticker price is lower. There are pros and cons to both. If you can get a wholesale customer that does have a tolerable discount but is buying at a decent volume in cheaper packaging like flats and cases, wholesale sales can still be a win. Finally, paperwork. This is for another day. Think about your regulations and certifications that you're under. Make sure you have insurance both for the farm and for commercial for any business you're doing off the farm. Third-party certifications, if they are of value to you and your marketplace, could be certified organic, could be animal welfare approved, certified naturally grown, this, that, and the other thing. Health claims, make sure you have documentable laboratory proof of any claims you make regarding health.
Any health claims have to be approved by USDA.
Yes, and USDA does have very specific definitions for each of those health claims. So on the small scale, I'd be really careful about what you say. You are going to have to think about how to pay for all this. For those who are thinking about small commercial flocks, I would encourage you to look into microloans from the FSA or from local organizations. That's usually something that ranges from $5,000 to $35,000. You can start a nice small commercial operation with 35 grand, especially if you've got used equipment. Okay. And do I have a moment to try and address some of the questions that have come up?
Yes,
Jackie?
we can. You haven't missed a lot of questions. If anyone has a last minute question, now's your time to type it in. We have gone a little bit over time, and hopefully
Sorry.
Suzanne won't kick us off.
Regarding poultry as an enterprise, I suggest that your market is the most important factor. A business plan with a marketing plan is essential. I wholeheartedly echo that.
I think also you need
Nebraska,
to really think about product and liability insurance. If somebody gets sick
Yes.
from any of your eggs, you can be held liable, and lawsuits can get really expensive.
Yep, that's that commercial liability that I mentioned here very briefly. Very important. You are selling a product, whether you're selling eggs or broilers, that is considered a potentially hazardous food. So you do want to be sure to protect yourself, and you can do that with both business structure and insurance. LLCs, S corps, commercial insurance products. You want to have a good insurance agent on your side when you're trying to figure out what you're going to do.
And Dan is very
Nebraska Graded Egg Act states that they have to be washed unless they're sold straight from the farm. That's similar here in Illinois. If you are selling nest-run eggs, unwashed, unaltered, unpackaged nest-run eggs, you can sell them off the farm. It sounds like it's similar in Nebraska. What did I interrupt you about, Jackie?
I don't remember.
Sorry. Portable egg washer manufactured in Albany, Ohio. Sorry, go ahead.
With regards to the egg washer, one of the things that is very important is that some of the egg washers that you get for small flocks use water immersion. Big no-no. Don't immerse your eggs in water to wash them. That's a food safety nightmare.
Yes, it is. When you're changing the temperature of your eggs, you are changing sort of the size of the contents of that egg. If you get your eggs colder than the ambient temperature that they were in before, the contents will shrink and have some tendency to create a vacuum and pull microbia from the shell through the micropores.
It should be at least 20 degrees higher than the temperature of the egg.
Yes. If you're washing eggs by hand in a sink, you want it to be as hot as your hands can possibly handle. I wash eggs at 116 to 120 degrees. I think that's pretty widely acceptable. Portable egg washer manufactured in Albany, Ohio. Yes, there are tabletop egg washers. There are Instructables.com egg washers. There are a lot of different types of egg washers you can, but do pay attention to what Jackie said about don't do immersion washing if you possibly can. If you have highly soiled eggs, you can wet them briefly before you put them through your washer, but longer term immersion is...
If they're really dirty, you shouldn't be selling them.
Agreed. Just because the process of washing them is going to so compromise the...
food safety.
Yeah. If they're really dirty, they're not worth the work. It's one freaking egg. Doesn't submerge the eggs, it runs through a cylinder brush with a drip bar. Yep, and that's the way a lot of the small flock type of egg cleaners work, is they have a drip bar that's going to drip that solution of detergent sanitizer onto the egg as a spinning brush cleans the surface. Whew. You fit a lot of words into 70 minutes, Jackie.
There was one last question. Are you at the size you want to be for your egg operation?
I'm not at the size I want to be, but we're at the size my wife wants to be. So we're at a bit of an impasse. if I was to grow my egg operation much past, say, 5 to 600 layers, I would start thinking pretty seriously about a little bit more mechanization in my egg
Right.
handling. The major bottleneck for me is currently candling. It takes a good long time to handle each one of those eggs, spin it in front of a bright light to make sure there's no
Especially
cracks or
if they're
blood
brown
spots,
eggs.
and set it into a carton. Yeah, we have to have a nice bright halogen light shining at us to make sure that we can see the interior of those eggs. Um, we've been lucky thus far. We haven't had complaints about problems with the interior egg contents. There's one, we had one complaint from somebody who took a dozen of our checks. Checks are the ones that are cracked or otherwise unsaleable. And we gave him a dozen of those, and he found a nasty one, but I don't know how many weeks he let it set
Yeah.
around
Should,
either.
should be very careful about this.
So no, I would prefer to be in somewhere between 1,800 and 2,400 layers. That would be my ultimate goal as to where I want to be, and still consider myself small scale, and me and my wife's operation to be part of a broader order family farm
You get to a
enterprise.
certain size too, and you start getting
But
into more regulations with needing a egg handler's license and all that kind of stuff.
yes, absolutely. And I believe that the threshold for starting to become federally inspected is
Something like
3,000
that.
birds.
In our state, if you sell more than
Yeah.
60 dozen eggs a week, you have to have an egg handling license. So it varies from state to state.
Yes.
Well,
And I have to have an egg handling license to sell off my farm,
right.
away from the farm.
Especially if you sell wholesale.
So yeah.
So, especially if you sell
Pardon?
wholesale, you have to have a food handling license.
Yes.
We're well past our time.
Yes.
If you notice on his last slide, he does have his email address down there. He even provided a phone number. If you have any questions for Andy, I'm sure he won't mind if you email him with your questions. Um, yeah,
I'll do
and
what I
we'll have
can.
to let Suzanne go, so because we're past our time. So thank you everybody for participating. Check out the extension.org/poultry for upcoming webinars. We have a whole series on egg production coming up starting next week. And we have a health series coming up starting in January. So please check us out and catch any webinars of interest. So thank you, Andy. Appreciate it.
You betcha, Jackie.
You
Have a
too.
good night, you all.
We're finished, Suzanne. You can